Harper Lane slammed the ledger shut so hard the oil lamp rattled on the desk, and her hands were shaking not from fear, but from the kind of fury that only comes when a woman finally understands she has been watching a man get robbed blind by the very people he trusted most. If this story speaks to something in your heart, please subscribe to this channel. Hit that notification bell and follow every part of Harper's journey to the very end. Drop a comment right now telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you know someone who's ever been underestimated, share this with them. Now let's go back to where it all began. The stagecoach didn't slow down when it reached Coldwater Creek. It rolled past the feed store, past the sheriff's office, past the three women standing on the boardwalk with their parasols tilted just so, and it didn't stop until it reached the far end of Main Street, where the road turned to dirt, and the buildings gave way to open range. Harper Lane climbed down before the driver even set the brake. She didn't wait for help. She never did. She reached back into the coach, dragged out her trunk by the leather handle, and dropped it in the dust with a solid thud that made the nearest horse flinch. She straightened up, pulled her coat flat across her chest, and looked down the long stretch of road toward the hills in the west. She had a name written on a folded letter in her coat pocket. Grayson Holt. Holt Ranch. 14 miles out. That was all she needed. Well, Lord have mercy. The voice came from behind her loud enough to carry across the whole street. Look at what the stage dragged in. Harper didn't turn around. Reckon she's gonna need 2 horses just to haul herself out to whatever poor soul hired her. Laughter followed the sharp, cruel kind that didn't bother lowering itself. She crouched down, unlatched the trunk, checked that nothing had shifted during the 3-day ride, and latched it again. Her fingers were steady, her jaw was set. She had learned a long time ago that turning around to face ridicule only gave it the audience it was hungry for. "Excuse me, ma'am." This voice was different, younger. She looked up to find a boy of maybe 16 standing a few feet away, hat in hand, watching her with the cautious respect of someone who'd been raised right. "You heading out to Holt Ranch?" "I am," Harper said. "I got a wagon going out that way in about an hour. You're welcome to ride along if you don't mind waiting." Harper looked at him for a moment at the earnest set of his face, the way he held his hat with both hands, like he didn't quite know what to do with himself. "What's your name?" "Danny Pruitt, ma'am. I work the livery." "Thank you, Danny," she said. "I'll wait." She sat on her trunk at the edge of the road and opened the letter again. Though she had already read it so many times, the creases were soft as cloth. The handwriting was a man's broad strokes, slightly uneven, the kind of penmanship that suggested the writer was more comfortable with a rope than a pen. Miss Lane. "I am in need of a cook and household manager for my ranch. My previous housekeeper left without notice, and I have 2 children and 12 hands to feed, and a property that has been poorly managed in my absence. I cannot pay much to start. But I give my word, the work is honest and the roof is solid. If you are willing, come to Coldwater Creek and ask at the livery for directions. G. Holt." No flattery, no promises. Just the plain facts of a man in trouble. She had answered it for the same reason. Danny was true to his word. An hour later, Harper's trunk was loaded in the back of a wagon, and she was sitting up front beside a man in his 50s named Arlo, who smelled like tobacco and didn't ask her a single question the entire 14 miles, which suited her perfectly. The ranch came into view just as the afternoon light was going sideways across the land, golden and long, and throwing every shadow out behind it. She saw the house first, a 2-story structure with a porch that ran the full length of the front. Solid construction, she noted. But the porch railing had 2 broken spindles, and the kitchen garden on the south side had gone entirely to weeds. One of the shutters on the upper window hung at a wrong angle. The fence along the near pasture needed reposting. None of it was unfixable. The bigger picture was what she was looking at. The cattle in the far pasture were thin. The barn doors were open when they shouldn't have been in this wind. A pile of supply crates sat uncovered near the smokehouse, and one of them had already gone dark with moisture. She climbed down from the wagon before Arlo brought it to a full stop. "Miss Lane, miss," she turned. A man was coming off the porch, moving with the kind of deliberate walk that meant he had somewhere to be and had decided to stop anyway. He was tall, lean through the shoulders, broader in the chest than he appeared at first, with dark hair pushed back beneath a worn hat, and a face that had seen enough sun and wind to look a decade older than she suspected he was. He had gray at his temples. His boots were clean, which told her something. His eyes were direct, which told her more. "Grayson Holt," he said, and extended his hand. She shook it without hesitation. His grip was firm, but not testing. "Harper Lane. Glad you made it." He glanced at her trunk in the back of Arlo's wagon. "I'll have someone bring that in." "I'll manage it," Harper said. Something shifted in his expression, not offense, just recalibration. He stepped back slightly, and she noted that he didn't push. "I'll show you the house," he said. The kitchen was the first thing she asked to see. It was a working kitchen, at least large iron stove, good table, adequate light from 2 east-facing windows. But the stores were low. The organization was non-existent, and there was flour spilled behind the bin that had clearly been there for more than a week. "How many you feeding daily?" she asked. 12 hands, myself. And my 2 children, Clara's 11, James is 8. "Any dietary restrictions among the hands?" He blinked. "I know. Not that I know of." "Allergies, injuries, anyone on a restricted diet?" Ed Rayner broke his jaw last spring. He still has trouble with tough cuts. Harper nodded and made a mental note. "I'll need to take full inventory of the stores before I can plan meals. I'll also need access to the account ledgers for household spending." There was a pause. Not long, just a half second, but she caught it. "The ledgers," he repeated. "Yes, if I'm managing the household, I need to know what's been spent, what's owed, and what the budget is going forward. I can't do the job properly without a clear picture of where things stand." He looked at her for a long moment. Not unkindly, but measuring. "That's a broader ask than most cooks make on day one." "I'm not most cooks," Harper said. Not sharply, just simply. "Your letter said poorly managed. I'd like to understand the scope of the problem before I start working against it." Grayson Holt was quiet. Then he said, "I'll get you the ledgers." The children found her before dinner. She was in the kitchen taking inventory with a stub of pencil and a folded sheet of paper when she heard footsteps on the stairs, 2 sets, one heavier, one lighter, both trying and failing to be quiet. She didn't look up. "I know you're there," she said. A pause. Then the kitchen door pushed open and 2 children came in with the tentative energy of creatures who had decided to be brave. The girl Clara had her father's direct eyes and a brown braid that had mostly escaped whatever it had started as. The boy James was smaller, rounder in the face, and was currently attempting to appear casual while clearly being extremely curious. "You're the new cook," Clara said. It wasn't a question. "I am," Harper said. "And you're Clara. And you're James." James looked slightly alarmed that she knew his name. Clara looked unsurprised. "Our last cook left," Clara said. "I know." She left without saying goodbye. Harper set down her pencil and gave the girl her full attention. That must have been hard. Clara's chin came up just slightly, the practiced gesture of a child who had learned not to show too much. "I didn't like her pie anyway." "What kind of pie do you like?" Clara blinked. Whatever she had expected Harper to say, it wasn't that. "Apple," she said after a moment. "Me too," said James, now apparently abandoning any pretense at casualness and moving closer. "With the sugar on top. Not too much, just the right amount." "I'll see what we have in the stores," Harper said. "No promises for tonight. But if there are apples, we'll see what we can do before Sunday." James looked at his sister. Clara looked at Harper. And some small, careful thing relaxed in the room. Dinner that first night was simple salt pork beans, cornbread, and a pot of strong coffee. Harper had worked with less and cooked for more. She moved efficiently, didn't waste, and had everything on the table at the time she had stated. The ranch hands filed in without much ceremony, took their seats and ate. Most of them didn't look at her directly. A few did, with expressions ranging from indifferent to quietly skeptical. One of them, a broad man, with red in his beard and a self-satisfied way of sitting, looked at her longer than the rest. He had the particular energy of a man who considered himself the informal authority in any room he occupied. "You the new one?" he said. "I am," Harper said. "Hank Doyle," he said, as though the name was supposed to mean something. "I've been on this ranch 7 years." "Good to know," Harper said, and moved to refill the bread basket. She felt his eyes on her back. She was not. She noted afraid of Hank Doyle. She was, however, paying very careful attention to him. After dinner, after the hands had gone and the children had been sent to bed, Harper sat down at the kitchen table with the ledgers Grayson had left for her. He had left them on the table without comment, just stacked them there as though he didn't quite want to watch her open them. She opened them. She was methodical. She always had been. She started at the most recent entries and worked backward, looking for the shape of things before she started looking for the details. And within the first 40 minutes, the shape became clear enough to make her sit very still for a moment. The household accounts were not simply poorly managed. They were being deliberately obscured. Entries that should have matched supply orders against deliveries received didn't. The discrepancies were small individually. $15 here, $22 there. A figure for grain that was 20% higher than the market price she knew from 3 towns back. A payment for fencing materials that bore a vendor name she'd never heard of. Another for labor that had no corresponding names or dates attached to it. Taken one at a time, any of these could have been an error. Taken together over 18 months, they added up to something between $1,200 and $1,500. Gone. Quietly. Consistently. By someone who knew the accounts well enough to keep the individual amounts small. Harper sat back in her chair and looked at the ledger in the lamplight. She thought about Hank Doyle and the way he had watched her back. She thought about the vendor name she didn't recognize. She thought about Grayson Holt, a man who had clearly been too overwhelmed by the larger crises of the ranch to look closely at the smaller, slower hemorrhage happening inside his own house. She closed the ledger. She wouldn't say anything yet. Not tonight. Not without proof she could put her hands on. But she would be watching. She would be counting. And she would be very, very careful about who she let see that she was doing it. In the morning, she was up before the sun. She had the stove going and coffee made before the first hand came through the back door. And she watched each face that came into her kitchen the way she had watched ledgers looking for the shape of things. Hank Doyle came in last. He sat at the far end of the table and poured his own coffee without asking, which told her he was accustomed to making himself at home in spaces that weren't entirely his. Grayson came in after the hands had gone. He looked tired. He had probably been tired for a while. She thought the specific tiredness of a man who was holding something together through will alone and had been doing it too long. He sat down and accepted the coffee she poured and looked at the table as though he was organizing his thoughts. "You looked at the ledgers," he said. "I did." And Harper poured her own coffee and sat down across from him. "Tell me about Evelyn Cross," she said. Something moved behind his eyes, a tension quick and deep, the kind a person doesn't fully hide because it's been living in them too long. "What do you know about Evelyn Cross? I know the name appears in your ledger in connection with a water rights dispute that you appear to have been losing ground on for the better part of 2 years, Harper said. "I know her family owns the land to your east. And I know that whoever is cooking your books has been doing it in amounts small enough not to trigger your attention, which tells me they've either done this before or been taught by someone who has." The kitchen was very quiet. Grayson set down his coffee cup. "How long did it take you to see all that?" "About 40 minutes. He looked at her. Not with the measuring look from yesterday. With something rawer than that. Something that was very close to the particular relief of a man who has been carrying a heavy thing alone for too long and has just been offered a second pair of hands. "I should have looked harder," he said. "You've been keeping a cattle operation running on reduced staff while managing a legal dispute and raising 2 children, Harper said. "You were looking where the fire was loudest. That's not a character flaw. It's just where a person's eyes go." He was quiet for a moment. Most people who've worked this ranch have told me what I wanted to hear. I'm not most people, Harper said. And because she meant it plainly and not as a boast, it landed that way. Grayson picked up his coffee. What do you need from me? Full access to every financial record going back 3 years, the name of your lawyer if you have one, and your honest answer to one question. Ask it. Do you trust Hank Doyle? Grayson was silent for just a beat too long. That's my answer, Harper said. Outside, the sun was finally coming over the ridge, and the ranch was waking up around them, the sound of horses, the distant call of one hand to another, the particular creak of the barn door that had been hanging wrong since she arrived. All the sounds of a place that was still alive, still working, still worth saving. Harper Lane wrapped both hands around her coffee cup and started building her plan. The 3 years of financial records Grayson brought her filled half the kitchen table. Harper didn't touch them right away. She stood at the edge of the table and looked at the stacks, ledger books, loose invoice sheets, folded and refolded until the creases had gone soft. A few letters with legal headers at the top, and she let herself see the shape of it all before she reached for any single piece. I pulled everything I had, Grayson said from the doorway. Some of it's disorganized. That's all right, Harper said. Disorganized is workable. Missing is the problem. What do you mean? She looked at him. Are there any records you can't find? Invoices you know should exist, but aren't in these stacks. Payment receipts that were never returned to you after someone else handled a transaction. He rubbed the back of his neck. There were some invoices Hank handled directly. Supplier pickups mostly. He'd take the payment and bring back the goods, and I trusted him to file the paperwork. Did he? The silence was answer enough. All right, Harper said. She pulled out the chair and sat down. Go run your ranch. I'll come find you when I have something. He hesitated in the doorway. You sure you want to do this alone? She looked up at him. Mr. Holt, I've been doing hard things alone my entire life. This is just paperwork. He left without another word, and Harper reached for the first ledger. By mid-morning, she had separated the records into 3 categories: verified, inconsistent, and unaccounted. The verified stack was the smallest. The unaccounted stack was making her jaw tight. It wasn't just the numbers. It was the pattern. Someone had been extraordinarily patient. The false entries never appeared in consecutive months. They were spaced deliberately. January, then nothing until April, then nothing again until August. As though whoever was doing this understood that rhythm was what got a person caught. Keep the gaps irregular. Keep the amounts below the threshold a busy man would stop to question. And always use vendor names that sounded plausible enough that no one would think to check whether they actually existed. Harper checked. She had spent enough years managing households across 4 different territories to know the names of legitimate supply operations across a wide corridor of the West. She had dealt with grain merchants, lumber operations, feed suppliers, saddle makers, and cattle brokers. The vendor name that appeared most frequently in the suspicious entries, Caldwell Dry Goods and Supply out of a town called Mercer Flats, was not a name she recognized. She wrote it down. Then she wrote down the total. Across 31 months, someone had funneled, by her most conservative estimate, just over $1,800 out of Holt Ranch through fictitious supply orders. $1,800. She sat with that number for a moment. It was the difference she suspected between a ranch that was struggling and a ranch that was failing. She was still sitting with it when the kitchen door opened and Hank Doyle walked in. He didn't knock. He never knocked, she had noticed. He came in the way a man comes into a room he considers his own territory hat on, moving directly toward the stove where the coffee was kept, and he poured himself a cup before he acknowledged her at all. "Morning," he said, with the lazy confidence of a man who was not even slightly concerned about her presence. "Morning," Harper said. She had already shifted the unaccounted stack beneath a clean piece of burlap she kept on the table for covering food. She had done it casually, without hurry, the moment she heard his boot on the back step. Doyle leaned against the counter and looked at the table. "What's all that?" "Household inventory," Harper said. I'm tracking current stores against projected meal needs for the next 4 weeks. It was a completely plausible answer. And it was also in its mechanics, not entirely a lie. She had done exactly that work first thing this morning before pulling the financial records. Doyle grunted. His eyes moved across the table without urgency. He was either not suspicious or very good at appearing that way. Holt, have you doing the books too? He asked me to review household spending, yes. That's a lot for a cook. Harper looked up at him steadily. I suppose it is, she said. She let the silence sit. She did not fill it. She had learned that the way a person responded to a silence told you considerably more than anything they said into it. Doyle drank his coffee. His eyes went to the window. His jaw worked slightly the way a man's does when he is chewing on something he hasn't decided to say yet. Then he set the cup down and said, Holt's been under a lot of pressure lately, from Evelyn Cross. Has he? Harper said. Not a question. A receipt. She's got him dead to rights on the North Water access. The paperwork goes back 20 years. Her family's got prior claim and he knows it. Most folks in town think he ought to just settle. He paused. You run across anything about that in those records of yours? And there it was. Harper met his eyes. I'm just tracking grocery spending, Mr. Doyle. Something moved in his face. Very small. Very fast. Then the easy confidence settled back over it like water closing over a stone, and he picked up his hat from the counter. Right, he said. Well, let me know if you need anything moved. He left. Harper waited until she heard him cross the yard. Then she reached under the burlap and added one more notation to her list. HD asked directly about water rights records. Interest level significant. She found Grayson in the barn just before noon. He was checking a horse's left foreleg, crouched down, running his hand along the joint with focused attention, and he looked up when she came in. Something in her expression made him straighten immediately. What did you find? He said. $1,800, Harper said. Minimum. Likely closer to $2,000 when I finish cross-referencing. A vendor called Caldwell Dry Goods and Supply in Mercer Flats. Grayson went very still. I've sent payments to Caldwell. I know. That's how I found them. She paused. There is no Caldwell Dry Goods and Supply in Mercer Flats. I've worked with suppliers across this whole territory for 11 years. That name doesn't exist. He looked at her the way a man looks when he has just watched the ground shift under his feet. Not panicked, not even fully surprised. Just arrived. At the confirmation of a thing he had perhaps half known and not been ready to see clearly. Hank, he said. It wasn't a question. The pattern fits someone with consistent access to the accounts and enough authority to handle supplier payments without countersignature. You told me this morning he handled direct pickups. That's the mechanism. She paused. But I want to be careful. Before you confront anyone, I want to find the connection between those payments and wherever that money actually went. If it went to Doyle, I want the proof of it. If it went somewhere else or someone else, we need to know that before we move. Grayson's hands had gone to his hips. He was staring at the far wall of the barn. He's been with me 7 years, he said. I know. His boy works the east fence line. I know that too. He turned and looked at her. You're telling me to wait. I'm telling you that if you confront him today and he destroys evidence or runs, you lose the money and the proof. If you wait 2 or 3 days while I finish the records and find the payment trail, you have everything you need to take this to a lawyer or a sheriff. She held his gaze. The money is already gone, Mr. Holt. What matters now is what you do next. And what you do next should not be fast. It should be right. The barn was quiet around them. One of the horses blew out a long breath. Dust moved in the light. You've done this before, Grayson said. I've seen it before, Harper said. Different ranch, different man, same pattern. The man I worked for then moved too fast, got angry, confronted without proof. The thief walked away clean, and the rancher looked like a fool in front of his whole crew. She paused. I'd like you to have a better outcome than that. He looked at her for a long moment. All right, he said. We wait. She spent the afternoon with the remaining records, and by 3 o'clock she had found something that changed the shape of everything. Tucked inside the back cover of the third ledger, folded 3 times, tucked with the casual deliberateness of someone who expected it to stay hidden, was a letter. It wasn't addressed to Grayson. It was addressed to Hank Doyle. And it was signed by Evelyn Cross. Harper read it twice. Then she sat very still for a full minute looking at the wall. The letter was careful. It didn't say anything outright. It was the kind of letter written by a person who understood that documents could be found and used. But what it said in the measured language of someone who had thought every sentence through was this: that a certain arrangement had been productive, that the provider of certain information had been reliable, that the next phase of the matter would require a different kind of cooperation, and that compensation for this cooperation would be, as previously discussed, commensurate with results. Harper set the letter on the table. Hank Doyle was not just stealing from Grayson Holt. He was being paid by Evelyn Cross to do it. The financial hemorrhage from the ranch, the $2,000 quietly siphoned over 31 months, was not an employee helping himself to what he thought he could get away with. It was a coordinated strategy. Weaken the ranch's finances. Create conditions of desperation. And then, when the time came to press a legal claim on the water rights or the land itself, press against a man who no longer had the resources to fight back. She found Grayson at the house just as the sun was going down. She put the letter on the table in front of him without preamble. He read it once, read it again, set it down. "She's been running him," he said. "Since at least 18 months ago, based on when the payment pattern started escalating," Harper said. "Possibly longer." Grayson pushed back from the table and stood up. He walked to the window, stood with his back to her, hands braced against the frame, and she could see the tension moving through him, the particular contained fury of a man who had extended trust and had it used as a weapon against him. "Cross has been filing claims on my Northwater access for 2 years, he said. "She keeps bringing new paperwork, amended surveys, revised deed interpretations. Every time my lawyer gets it dismissed, she comes back with something else. And now I find out she's had a man inside my operation the whole time. Feeding her information about your finances, your legal position, your resources," Harper said. "So she knows exactly how hard to push and when." He turned from the window. His expression was controlled, but barely. "What do I do with this?" "You take it to your lawyer. Tomorrow, not the day after tomorrow." She leaned forward slightly. "But before you do, I need to tell you one more thing." He waited. "Your Northwater access dispute. I saw the relevant documents in your legal correspondence files this afternoon." She paused. "Mr. Holt, the original deed language on your land grant includes a clause specifically protecting water access for operational use. It's written in the 1871 grant document in language that predates the survey interpretations Cross has been using. Her entire case rests on a secondary survey that was conducted in 1879, 8 years after your deed was recorded." She watched his face. "Your lawyer may have missed it. These older grant documents are written in dense legal language, and the clause is in the third addendum, which is easy to overlook in a large filing. But it's there. And if it's presented correctly, it doesn't just defeat her current claim. It ends the dispute entirely." The kitchen was absolutely silent. Grayson Holt looked at her the way a man looks at something he can't quite find a category for. "You found that in one afternoon," he said. "I found it because I was looking," Harper said. "Your lawyer wasn't looking for that. He was looking at the 1879 survey because that's what Cross has been arguing about. I went back further." He sat down, slowly, like a man whose legs had decided to do it before he made the conscious choice. He put both hands flat on the table and stared at the wood grain for a moment. "Harper," he said. "Yes. Why are you doing this?" The question was genuine, not suspicious, just direct. The kind of question a man asks when he's been surprised enough times in a short span that he needs to understand the ground he's standing on. She considered the question seriously, the way it deserved. "Because your children ate dinner at that table tonight and told me about their mother," she said. And because a place that can be saved should be saved. And because I've spent a long time watching people get taken advantage of by those who are willing to be patient and ruthless about it, and I find that I have a very strong objection to it. She paused. And because you hired me to manage your household, Mr. Holt, and in my understanding of that job, the household includes everything inside the fence line. He was quiet for a moment, then very quietly. Her name was Ruth, my wife. I know, Harper said. James told me she made the best apple pie in 3 counties. Something moved across Grayson Holt's face, brief and real, and quickly managed. She did, he said. Harper stood up. Get some sleep. Tomorrow morning we go to your lawyer. We present the letter and the financial records, and we begin to take this apart properly. Cross has been patient and careful, but she's built her strategy on the assumption that you didn't know what she was doing. That assumption is no longer valid. She gathered the relevant papers into a careful stack, folded the letter back exactly as she'd found it, evidence needed to stay intact, and tied the stack with a piece of kitchen twine. She was at the kitchen doorway when Grayson spoke again. Harper. She stopped. Thank you, he said. It was the simple, unguarded kind. She nodded once and went upstairs. In her room, she sat on the edge of the bed in the dark for a few minutes before she lit the lamp. She could hear the ranch settling around her, the distant lowing of cattle, the creak of the house in the evening wind, James's light snoring through the wall they shared. She had been in harder situations than this one. She had worked for difficult men, navigated hostile households, managed crises that arrived without warning. She knew how to keep her footing on uncertain ground. But she also knew that what she had found today, the letter, the clause in the deed, the full shape of what Evelyn Cross had built against this man, was bigger than an accounting problem. Cross had resources and lawyers and patience. She had a plan that had been running for at least 2 years, possibly more, and a confederate inside the ranch who would know the moment the situation shifted. Which meant that when Doyle realized Harper had found what she found, things would move quickly. She reached over and turned up the lamp. She pulled out her notebook. There was still work to do. Grayson's lawyer was a man named Theodore Briggs, and he operated out of a narrow office above the hardware store on Coldwater Creek's main street. He was 60-something, thin through the shoulders, with reading spectacles he kept pushing up his nose, and a general air of having seen most of what the world had to offer and found it only mildly interesting. That air lasted exactly as long as it took Harper to lay the letter from Evelyn Cross on his desk. Briggs read it, read it again, set it down, and took his spectacles off and looked at Grayson. Where did you find this? In my own ledger, Grayson said. Tucked in the back cover. Miss Lane found it. Briggs looked at Harper for the first time with something approaching full attention. You're the new housekeeper. Household manager, Harper said. And yes, he looked back at the letter. If this is authenticated, this changes the entire posture of the water rights case. Cross has had an agent inside your operation. That means any information she's filed with the court that could only have come from your private records is potentially tainted. Her filings, her amended surveys, her deed interpretations, all of it becomes suspect if we can demonstrate she obtained privileged information through deliberate infiltration. There's more, Harper said. She placed the financial summary she had prepared the night before, 12 pages organized by date, cross-referenced against the false vendor entries on the desk beside the letter. $1,800 at minimum, likely $2,000. False vendor payments routed through a fictitious supply company. The pattern is consistent with a single actor who had regular access to the accounts and the authority to process payments without counter-signature. Briggs stared at the summary. He picked up one page, then another. His spectacles went back on. You prepared this yourself. Last night, Harper said. In one night. I work efficiently. Grayson, sitting in the chair beside her, made a sound that might have been the beginning of a very restrained laugh, quickly controlled. Briggs set the pages down. He laced his fingers together on the desk and looked at both of them with the measured expression of a man recalculating odds. All right, he said. Here is where we stand. The letter gives us leverage, But it also gives us a problem. The moment Cross knows we have it, she will move. She will accelerate whatever she has planned next, because the letter is the one piece of evidence that connects her directly to your internal operation. She won't want it to reach a judge. Then we don't tell her we have it, Harper said. Briggs looked at her. Go on. She doesn't know what I found because Doyle doesn't know what I found. As of this morning, Doyle still believes I'm tracking grocery spending. The moment we move against him or against Cross's filings, he'll know, and he'll go straight to her. Harper paused. So we don't move against Doyle yet. We let him continue to believe the situation is unchanged, and we use that window to get the deed clause properly documented and filed before Cross has any reason to know we've found it. Briggs was quiet for a moment. The 1871 deed clause, he said slowly. Third addendum, the operational water access protection. It predates the 1879 survey by 8 years. The lawyer sat back in his chair and looked at her with an expression that on a younger face she might have called astonished. On Briggs it came out as a very deep form of professional respect. I've been working this case for 2 years, he said. I reviewed that deed filing. You were looking at the 1879 survey, Harper said. Cross's team had already framed the argument around that document. When you're answering an argument, you look where the argument is pointing. The clause wasn't where anyone was pointing. Briggs was quiet again. Outside his window, Coldwater Creek went about its morning horses. Voices, the distant bang of something heavy being loaded or unloaded. Then he said, I need 3 days to pull the original deed from the county records office and prepare a proper filing. Can you keep Doyle uninformed for 3 days? Yes, Harper said. She meant it without qualification, and both men in the room could hear that she did. They rode back to the ranch in silence for most of the way. The land stretched out on either side of the road, open and wide and indifferent to everything that small humans were doing on its surface, and Harper sat straight in the saddle and thought through the next 72 hours with the systematic attention she gave to everything. It was Grayson who broke the silence. You know what the hardest part of this is? She looked at him. 7 years, he said. Hank Doyle ate at my table, worked my land. He was at Ruth's funeral. He paused. My kids call him by his first name. Harper let the silence hold for a moment before she said, the people most capable of sustained betrayal are the ones who are good at appearing trustworthy. That's not a flaw in your judgment. That's exactly what he wanted you to think. Grayson looked at the road ahead. When did you get so practical about people? When being sentimental about them kept costing me, Harper said. He glanced at her sideways. Something in his expression shifted, not pity she was glad to note, just recognition. The particular recognition of one person who has paid for their education in hard currency, seeing the same quality in another. How long have you been doing this kind of work? He asked. 11 years, she said. Started when I was 21. 3 territories, 9 households, and more financial disasters than I care to count. Always as a cook. I was hired as a cook in most of them, she said. I ended up as whatever the situation required. Grayson was quiet for a moment. Then, the man who didn't move fast enough, the rancher you mentioned, what happened to his ranch? Harper looked at the road. He lost it, she said. 2 years after I left. The man who stole from him bought it at auction for 1/4 of its value. The words landed in the space between them with the weight she had intended. That won't happen here, Grayson said. No, Harper said. It won't. She made it her business over the next 2 days to be absolutely unremarkable. She cooked. She managed stores. She dealt with the minor domestic crises that arose in any household of this size, a torn grain sack, a dispute between 2 of the younger hands about a shared bunk, Clara's school dress that needed mending before Thursday. She was visible busy and apparently absorbed entirely in the mechanics of keeping 14 people fed and the house running. And she watched Hank Doyle. He was good. She would give him that. He had the practiced normalcy of a man who had been living a double life long enough that it had stopped feeling like an effort. He worked the ranch, managed the hands, ate his meals, and gave no external sign of anything except the ordinary contained tension of a man in a position of informal authority. But he was watching her too. She caught it in small ways. The slight delay before he answered a question she hadn't actually asked. The way his eyes moved to the table when he came into the kitchen, checking without appearing to check whether the records were there. The one time she came down the back stairs unexpectedly in the early evening and found him standing in the kitchen alone near the table where she kept her working papers, with his hand resting on the edge of the surface. He stepped back when he heard her. "Thought I smelled coffee," he said easily. "The pot's cold," Harper said. She moved to the stove, keeping her back to him, keeping her hand steady. "I can put a fresh one on." "Don't bother," he said. "I'll head to the bunkhouse." After he left, she checked her papers without touching them visibly. Everything was exactly where she had left it, but that was because the documents that mattered were not on the table at all. They were in the locked box she kept under the floorboard beneath her bed, which she had discovered on her first night when she noted the board had been recently relayed with a nail pattern that didn't match the surrounding floor. Someone before her had used it. She used it better. On the morning of the third day, Briggs rode out to the ranch. He came alone, which was correct. A lawyer visiting a client was unremarkable. Harper had the kitchen cleared by the time he arrived. Clara and James were at school. The hands were out on the range. Only Grayson and Harper were at the table when Briggs spread his documents and said, "It's done." He walked them through it. The original 1871 deed, pulled from the county records with the third addendum clearly flagged and annotated. A legal brief prepared overnight. Briggs had apparently not slept, arguing that the operational water access clause predated and superseded the 1879 survey interpretation on which all of Cross's claims were based. A formal filing already submitted to the county courthouse that morning, which meant it was now part of the public record, and Cross's lawyers would see it within 24 hours. Once they see this filing, they'll know the entire basis of their water rights case is compromised, Briggs said. They'll have options. They can try to challenge the interpretation. They can try to get the deed clause voided on some technicality, or they can settle. But they cannot ignore it. And when they see it, Grayson said, they'll know we've been digging. Yes, Briggs said, that's when things will accelerate. Harper, who had been listening without speaking, said, when Cross's lawyers see that filing, the first thing Cross will do is contact Doyle. She'll want to know how much we know and how we found it, and Doyle will come looking. Both men looked at her. He's going to make a move in the next 24 to 48 hours, she said. Either he'll try to get the letter back, which means he knows it was in the ledger and has known since before I found it, or he'll try to access the financial records to see how much I've documented. She paused. Either way, we should let him try. And when he does, we'll have him. Grayson's jaw tightened. You want to use you as bait. I want to use the documents as bait, Harper corrected. I'll be nearby. Harper, Mr. Holt. Her voice was steady and direct. Doyle needs to believe he still has an opportunity to contain this. If he thinks there's a chance he can retrieve the letter or destroy the financial summary before it reaches a court, he'll take it. And when he does, we'll have him in the act. Briggs can bring the sheriff. We catch Doyle attempting to tamper with evidence, we have grounds that make him cooperative very quickly, because a cooperative Doyle who names Cross directly is worth considerably more than a terminated employee. Briggs looked at her with his spectacles slightly tilted, and an expression that suggested he was reconsidering the entire structure of his professional life. That is, he said slowly, a legally sound strategy. Grayson stood up and walked to the window. His back was to the room. His hands were at his sides. Harper could see from the set of his shoulders that he was working through something, not reluctance exactly, but the specific struggle of a man who did not like the idea of someone else taking on risk on his behalf, particularly someone he was beginning to realize he did not want to see harmed. I don't like it, he said. I know, Harper said, but you'll allow it because it's right. He turned and looked at her. There was something in his face she had not seen there before. Not the relief of a burdened man finding unexpected help, not the recalibrating assessment of a skeptic revising his estimate. Something quieter and more complicated than either of those things. "You don't bend easy," he said. "No," Harper said. "I never have." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he looked at Briggs. "How long before Cross's lawyers see the filing?" "By tomorrow morning at the latest," Briggs said. "Possibly by tonight." "Then we set it tonight," Grayson said. Harper was back at the kitchen table by mid-afternoon, the household records spread around her in their ordinary working arrangement. She had placed the financial summary, the real one tied with the same piece of kitchen twine in its visible position on the left side of the table. She had left one page of it turned slightly outward, in a way that looked accidental and was not. She had placed the letter from Cross in the locked box under the floorboard where it had been. The decoy she had prepared, a folded blank sheet of similar weight paper, in the back cover of the third ledger, was in position. She cooked dinner. She served it. She said goodnight to the children. At 9 o'clock she went upstairs, lit her lamp, and turned it down low enough to suggest sleep, while leaving enough light to be visible under her door. Then she sat in the chair in the dark corner of the room that was not visible from the doorway, and she waited. At 10:30 she heard the bottom stair creak. She did not move. Footsteps, careful and deliberate, crossed the downstairs hallway. The kitchen door, which she had left unlatched, opened with a sound that was almost nothing. Silence. Then the particular shuffle of someone moving in a room they were trying to navigate without disturbing anything. Harper stood up. She moved to her door and opened it without sound. She went down the stairs the way she had practiced that afternoon, stepping over the third step and the seventh keeping to the left edge where the boards were solid. In the kitchen doorway she stopped. Hank Doyle was at the table. He had the third ledger open. He was reaching for the back cover. "Looking for something," Harper said. Doyle spun around. His hand went to his hip before he caught himself. His face in the low light was doing several things at once, calculating, deciding, settling into something harder than his usual easy confidence. "Miss Lane," he said, and his voice had a quality she hadn't heard in it before. Not the lazy authority of a man comfortable in his territory. Something tighter than that. "The letter isn't there," Harper said. She did not move from the doorway. "It's been in the county courthouse filing for the better part of 3 days." The change in Doyle's face was like watching a road washout. He came off the table fast. He took 2 steps toward her and stopped. And in that stop, she could see him calculating something, measuring something, making a decision about how far he was willing to go. Behind him, the back door opened. Grayson Holt came in. And behind him, carrying the particular quiet authority of a man whose job had just become straightforward, was Sheriff Cole Mattis of Coldwater Creek. Doyle looked from the sheriff to Grayson, and something in him went out like a lamp. "Hank," Grayson said. His voice was very quiet. "Don't make this harder than it already is." Doyle looked at Harper. There was something in his expression that she might have called admiration, if it didn't have so much bitter frustration running through it. "How long?" he said. "The financials." 3 days, Harper said. "The letter, the day I arrived." He laughed, a short, hard sound with no humor in it. "Cross said you were just a cook." "People generally do," Harper said. Mattis stepped forward. Doyle, to his credit, did not make anyone's job difficult. He put his hands out and said nothing more. As the sheriff walked him out the back door, Grayson turned and looked at Harper across the kitchen. The lamp was burning low between them. His face was open in a way she had not seen it before, stripped of the careful management he usually kept in place. Just a man standing in his own kitchen at 11 o'clock at night, looking at the woman who had just handed him back everything he thought he was about to lose. "It's not over," Harper said, because it wasn't. Doyle in custody was one thread. Evelyn Cross was still out there with her lawyers and her resources and the specific ruthlessness of a person who had been playing a long game and did not accept that it was finished. "I know," Grayson said. "She'll come at you differently now. Without Doyle feeding her information, without the financial leverage. But she won't stop." "I know that too," he said. He crossed the kitchen in a few steps and reached out, not to shake her hand the way he had the first day, but to put one hand briefly on her shoulder, steady and deliberate. The gesture of a man communicating something he didn't have the words sorted for yet. Get some sleep, he said. Harper looked up at him. You too. He nodded and let his hand drop and went to check the door. Mattis had gone out. Harper turned back to the table and began straightening the records. The night was very large and very quiet. And in her chest, Harper Lane felt the particular quiet satisfaction of a woman who had done what she came to do and was beginning to understand that what she had come to do was only the beginning of why she had actually stayed. Evelyn Cross did not come herself. She sent her lawyer. His name was Gerald Fitch, and he arrived at Holt Ranch 2 days after Doyle's arrest with the polished, unhurried manner of a man who believed that money and paper were the only weapons that mattered. He was younger than Briggs by a decade, better dressed by considerable margin, and he stood on Grayson's porch with his hat in both hands and a document case under his arm, and smiled with the particular warmth of someone who had been paid to appear reasonable. Grayson answered the door. Harper stood behind him slightly to the left, where she could see Fitch's face clearly without being the first thing Fitch looked at. Mr. Holt, Fitch said, I represent Miss Evelyn Cross. I wonder if we might speak privately. Anything you have to say to me, you can say in front of my household manager, Grayson said. Fitch's eyes moved to Harper. Something registered brief and quickly smoothed over, and he nodded. Of course, I'll be direct then. My client is aware of recent developments, the county filing the matter of Mr. Doyle. She asked me to come and convey that she has no wish for this situation to become any more complicated than it already is. That's interesting, Grayson said. Since she's the one who made it complicated, Fitch smiled patiently. My client maintains that she had no knowledge of Mr. Doyle's financial activities and that any suggestion of a connection between those activities and her legitimate legal claims against this property is entirely speculative. She wrote him a letter, Harper said. Fitch looked at her. A letter which I understand contains no explicit reference to any financial arrangement. Careful reading of that document reveals nothing more than a business acquaintance maintaining correspondence. Careful reading of that document reveals a woman coordinating with a man who was systematically draining this ranch's finances at the same time she was pressing legal claims against it, Harper said. A judge will find that timeline very interesting. Miss Lane, Harper said. Miss Lane, I appreciate your perspective, but legal interpretation is a nuanced matter and I'd caution against Mr. Fitch, Harper said, and her voice had a quality in it that made the lawyer stop mid-sentence. Not loudness, not hostility, just a very clean, very direct authority that didn't leave room for the kind of practiced verbal navigation he was accustomed to operating in. Your client sent you here because she is worried. If she were not worried, she would have filed another amended survey and waited. Instead, she sent you to the ranch in person 2 days after an arrest, which means she wants to know how much we have before she decides what to do next. I'm telling you directly, we have enough. And we are not interested in a private settlement that keeps this quiet. Fitch looked at her for a long moment. He looked at Grayson. He looked back at his document case as though recalibrating what he had brought. My client is prepared to withdraw the water rights claim entirely, he said, in exchange for the return of the letter and an agreement that the matter of Mr. Doyle's employment practices remains a private personnel issue rather than a matter for further legal proceedings. The porch was very quiet. Grayson looked at Harper. Harper looked at Fitch. No. Fitch blinked. I'm sorry. The answer is no. She kept her voice even. The water rights claim should be withdrawn because the 1871 deed clause makes it legally indefensible. That's not a concession, that's a correction. The letter goes to the court because it's evidence of coordinated interference with a legal proceeding. And the matter of Mr. Doyle is already with the sheriff's office, which means it is not a private personnel matter and has not been since the night he was arrested. She paused. Your client does not get to offer us things she has no right to withhold in exchange for our silence about things a court will determine anyway. That is not a negotiation. That is an attempt to slow us down. Fitch closed his document case. He stood on the porch for another moment, and in that moment, Harper could see him performing the arithmetic, what he had come expecting to accomplish, what he was actually leaving with, and what that meant for the conversation he would have when he returned to Evelyn Cross. "I'll convey your position to my client," he said. His voice had lost its warmth. It wasn't hostile. It was simply professional, in the stripped-down way of a man who had stopped pretending. "You do that," Grayson said. Fitch left. They watched him ride down the road until the dust settled. Grayson turned and looked at Harper with an expression that was somewhere between gratitude and something she couldn't entirely name. "You just told Evelyn Cross's lawyer that we're going to war," he said. "We were already at war," Harper said. "I just stopped pretending otherwise." Briggs came to the ranch that evening. He sat at the kitchen table with coffee and the look of a man who had been busy in the best possible way. The energized, purposeful expression of a lawyer who had found the thread that unraveled everything. "Fitch called on me this afternoon," he said, "after he left here." "I expected he would," Harper said. "He was considerably less pleasant than I imagined he was with you." Briggs looked at his coffee. He suggested that if we proceed with introducing the letter as evidence, Cross's team will challenge its provenance. Argue it was improperly obtained, that it was in a private ledger and its discovery was a violation of various things. "She kept it in Grayson's ledger," Harper said, "in Grayson's house, in a record that belongs to this ranch. The legal standing on that challenge is considerably weaker than Fitch made it sound." "I agree," Briggs said, "but it will slow things down. They'll file motions. 3-4 months of procedural delay." He paused. "There's something else. I had a conversation this afternoon with a man named Martin Keene. He ranches to your North Grayson. You know him." "Since we were boys," Grayson said. "He came to my office voluntarily. He told me that Evelyn Cross approached him 6 months ago with an offer to buy his grazing easement on the East Ridge, the one that connects to your North pasture. He turned her down. But he said she approached him again 3 weeks ago, and this time she wasn't making an offer. She was presenting what she described as a fait accompli, that once the water rights on Holt land were resolved in her favor, the value of his easement would drop considerably, and he'd be better off selling now at her price." Briggs looked at Grayson. "She's been trying to encircle the ranch. Water from the north, grazing access from the east. Take both, and the cattle operation becomes unviable," Grayson said. His voice was flat. "Keene is angry," Briggs said. "He told me he's willing to testify to Cross's approach and the language she used. It establishes a pattern of coordinated action that makes the letter considerably more significant." Harper set down her cup. "When can you have him formally deposed?" Briggs looked at her. "I was thinking next week." "Tomorrow," Harper said. "Tomorrow is—" "Tomorrow," she said again. "Cross sent Fitch here today because she wanted to see how much we have. Now she knows we won't settle. She will move quickly. Whatever she has planned next, and she has something planned, because a woman who has been running this operation for 2 years does not give up after one failed negotiation, she will accelerate it. We need Keene's deposition on record before she has the chance to approach him again, or intimidate him, or offer him enough money that the calculation changes." Briggs and Grayson looked at each other. "Tomorrow," Briggs said. "I'll ride to Keene's place myself tonight," Grayson said. Harper nodded. "Take one of the reliable hands with you. Don't go alone." Something moved in Grayson's expression. "You expecting trouble?" "I'm expecting that Cross is out of patience and running out of clean options," Harper said. "And people in that position stop being careful." She was right. She was right in a way she had not fully anticipated, and it came from a direction she had not been watching. The next morning, 3 hours before Grayson was due back from Keene's property, one of the younger hands, a boy named Pete, barely 17, who had the earnest efficiency of someone trying very hard to prove himself, came sprinting to the kitchen door with his hat in his hand, and a look on his face that Harper had learned to read in the first 3 seconds something was wrong with the cattle. "How many?" she said before he could speak. He blinked. 40, maybe 50 head, from the north pasture. The fence line on the east side is down and there are tracks, wagon tracks, and horses mislain, a lot of them leading toward the cross property line. Harper was already moving. "Who's on the ranch right now?" 6 hands. Ed and Tommy are at the south fence. Billy's in the barn. Get Ed and Tommy back. Get Billy saddled. Do not go onto Cross's land without me." She paused at the kitchen door. "And Pete, you did right coming directly to me. Don't doubt that." The boy nodded hard and ran. Harper went upstairs, changed her skirt for the divided riding skirt she kept for exactly this kind of occasion, pulled on her boots, and was back downstairs in 4 minutes. She went to the locked box, retrieved the letter, and placed it in the inner pocket of her coat. She was not leaving that document alone in the house while she was elsewhere. She sent Danny Pruitt, who had come to the ranch that morning with a supply delivery to ride for Briggs and the sheriff, with a note she wrote in 2 minutes flat. She told Billy to get her horse saddled. She sent Pete to the nearest neighbor's property to borrow 2 additional riders, because 6 hands and 1 household manager were not going to be enough to retrieve 50 head of cattle, and she knew it. By the time Grayson came riding in from Keene's property at full gallop, someone had gotten word to him. Harper was already mounted and had 4 riders ready. He pulled up beside her and took in the assembled horses, the readied men, and Harper sitting straight in the saddle, with a look on her face that he was learning to recognize as her particular variety of contained fury. "You've already organized this," he said. 40 to 50 head east fence line heading for Cross's land. I've sent for the sheriff. Briggs knows. Keene can keep." She looked at him steadily. This is what she had planned next, not lawyers' physical action. She's taking the cattle to create a possession dispute, force a legal hold, and use it to delay the deed filing taking effect. Grayson's jaw was tight enough to cut glass. "She has people on my land." "Had," Harper said. "They're moving cattle, not holding position. If we move now, we catch them still in transit." She paused. "But Grayson, I need you to hear me on this. We recover the cattle. We do not engage in violence. Whatever happens out there, we bring the cattle home and we let Mattis handle the people. Because if any of your men start something, Cross will use it to flip the story in town, and we cannot afford that." He looked at her for a 3 count. "You thought all of that through in the last hour." "I thought all of that through the moment I understood what kind of woman Evelyn Cross is," Harper said. "Are you ready?" "Let's go," he said. They found the cattle 2 miles from the property line. 6 men on horseback, 2 wagons moving the herd in the unhurried manner of people who believed they had enough lead time. The moment Grayson's group came into view over the ridge, the operation changed character very quickly. 2 of the men on the outside of the herd broke and rode hard toward the cross property line, which was exactly what Harper had told Grayson they would do. "Let them go," she said. Grayson looked at her. "Let them go," she said again. "We have their faces. We have the wagon tracks. We don't need to catch every man, we need the cattle and the evidence. Chase those riders, and we scatter the herd." He absorbed this for exactly 1 second. "Ed," he called. "Tommy, take the east flank. Billy, Pete, swing north. Push them back to our line. Don't chase anyone who runs." The next 40 minutes were the hard physical work of moving cattle, with insufficient numbers cutting flanking, using the natural tendency of the herd against the scattered direction the fleeing men had pushed them. Harper worked the center line, riding with the efficiency of a woman who had grown up around working animals and had never forgotten it, reading the herd's movement and calling directions that the hands responded to with increasing confidence as they realized she knew what she was doing. By the time Mattis arrived with 2 deputies, the cattle were back across the property line, and 4 of Cross's men were sitting on the ground with their hands on their knees, and the particular look of men who had already decided that what they were being paid was not worth what came next. Grayson rode up beside Harper as Mattis started taking statements. His horse was blowing hard. He was breathing hard. He looked at her, and for a moment, neither of them said anything at all. "You can ride," he said finally. "Among other things," Harper said. He looked out at the recovered herd, the deputies, the 4 men on the ground. His face did something complicated and quiet. "She came at my cattle," he said. "She actually came at my cattle. She was desperate," Harper said. "Desperate people make the mistakes that end things. This," she gestured at the scene in front of them. "This ends things. Mattis has 4 men who can be pressured into testimony. We have tracks across the property line. we have a pattern of action that Briggs can lay out for a judge in a way that makes this morning the final piece." She paused. "It's over, Grayson. She just doesn't know it yet." He turned and looked at her. Full on, no calculation, no managed expression. Just a man seeing someone clearly. "I keep thinking I have an accurate picture of what you're capable of," he said. And then, Harper agreed quietly. Something shifted between them in that moment. Not dramatic, not sudden, the way these things almost never actually are. Just a warmth in the specific way he was looking at her. Just the particular quality of his silence, which was not the silence of a man with nothing to say, but of a man with more than he had sorted out how to say. Pete came riding up. "Sheriff wants to talk to you, Mr. Holt, and he says—" The boy paused, looking pleased in the way of someone delivering good news. "He says 2 of the men are already talking." Grayson looked at Harper one more second. Then he straightened in the saddle. "Tell him I'm coming." He rode toward Mattis. Harper stayed where she was for a moment, watching the recovered herd settle, watching the late afternoon light go long and golden across the land. Watching this ranch that she had arrived at 7 days ago. 7 days, she thought, which seemed impossible and entirely accurate. At the same time, hold itself together under a sky that didn't care either way. She cared. That was the thing she could no longer pretend otherwise about. She turned her horse and rode back toward the house, and she was already thinking about what came next, because it was not finished. Cross would answer for this morning, but answering was not the same as surrendering, and a woman with that much patience and that much money did not simply stop. There was still a legal proceeding. There was still Martin Keene's testimony. There was still the matter of making sure that what had been built against this ranch was not just stopped, but dismantled completely, and in a way that could never be quietly reassembled. Harper Lane rode through the gate of Holt Ranch with the low sun at her back and her hands steady on the reins. She had work to do. The courtroom in Coldwater Creek was not a large room, but it was full. Harper had not expected that. She had expected the principals Briggs, Fitch, Grayson, the judge, and perhaps a handful of the curious. What she found when she walked in behind Grayson on the morning of the hearing was every bench occupied standing men along the back wall, and the particular charged silence of a community that had decided this mattered to them. She kept her eyes forward and took her seat beside Briggs. Grayson sat to her left. His shoulder was close to hers, without quite touching. She was aware of it the way you are aware of a fire when you are standing near one in cold weather, not because it demands your attention, but because the warmth is simply there. Judge Harold Carey was a compact man with a white beard and the unhurried manner of someone who had been deciding things for a long time and had stopped being impressed by the theater of legal proceedings. He came in, sat down, looked at the room, and said, "Let's begin." Fitch went first. He was good. Harper would not deny it. He was composed, precise, and he had clearly spent the days since his ranch visit preparing the most defensible version of Evelyn Cross's position. He argued that the 1871 deed clause was ambiguous in its application to water access disputes of the kind at issue. He argued that the letter found in Grayson's ledger was improperly characterized and proved no coordination. He argued that the cattle incident was the result of a misunderstanding about property lines that his client deeply regretted. He used the word regret 4 times. Harper counted. Then Briggs stood up. He was not showy about it. He simply laid it out: the deed clause, the timeline, the financial records, the letter Martin Keene's testimony about being approached, and then pressured the 4 men arrested during the cattle recovery who had given sworn statements naming the person who had directed the operation. He put each piece on the table in front of the judge with the quiet confidence of a man who knew that the truth properly organized did not need embellishment. When he finished, the room was very still. Judge Carey looked at the documents for a long moment. Then he looked at Fitch. "Counselor, your client's amended surveys were based entirely on the 1879 boundary interpretation. Your Honor, the 1879 survey represents the most recent and therefore the most—" "The deed predates the survey by 8 years," the judge said. The operational water access clause is explicit. This is not an ambiguity question. He looked at Fitch over the top of his spectacles. Is your client present? She is not, Your Honor. She sent you in her place to argue a case that the documentary record does not support, while 4 of her employees are giving sworn testimony about her direct involvement in the theft of another man's cattle. The judge's voice had not changed in temperature, which somehow made it worse. That tells me something about your client's assessment of this proceeding. Fitch had the expression of a man whose position had just collapsed underneath him in a way he had privately anticipated but professionally hoped to avoid. Your Honor, the water rights claim is dismissed, Judge Carey said, with prejudice, which means Miss Cross does not get to bring it back in a different suit. The 1871 deed clause governs, period. As to the matter of the cattle theft and the demonstrated pattern of coordinated interference with Mr. Holt's legal proceedings, he looked at Mattis, who was standing along the wall. Sheriff, I trust you are proceeding on that front. We are, Your Honor, Mattis said. Then we're done here. The gavel came down. The room erupted, not in chaos, in the particular release of a community that had been holding its breath. Voices, movement, the sound of boots on floorboards. Grayson was on his feet, and Briggs was shaking his hand, and 3 ranchers from the surrounding area were pushing through to add their congratulations, and Harper sat in her chair for one moment, amid all of it, and let herself feel the thing she had been holding carefully in check for 10 days. It was done. Grayson turned and looked at her. The room was moving around him, and he was looking at her, and his expression had none of the careful management in it she had learned to read as his default. It was just his face, open and real, and what was in it was something she recognized, because she had seen it building for days and had chosen not to name it until she was sure enough to trust the naming. Harper, he said. She stood up. Thank you, he said. And then, because he was Grayson Holt, and he said what he meant without decorating it, that's not enough, what I just said. It's not close to enough. It's enough for today, Harper said. He looked at her for another moment. Then Martin Keene appeared at his shoulder with an extended hand, and the room pulled him away, and Harper let it because there was something she needed to do first. She found Clara and James outside on the boardwalk. They had not been allowed inside the courtroom. Harper had arranged for Danny Pruitt's mother to sit with them during the proceedings, and they were standing together with the particular tension of children who have been waiting for news they understand to be important. Clara had her arms crossed in her practiced way. James was holding the railing with both hands. When Harper came out and they read her face, James made a sound that was almost entirely involuntary, a sharp exhale of relief, and Clara uncrossed her arms and in 2 steps was standing directly in front of Harper with eyes that were very bright. It's done, Harper said. Your father won. Clara looked at her for 1 second. Then she put both arms around Harper's waist and pressed her face against her shoulder. And Harper put one hand on the back of the girl's head and held on. James grabbed Harper's other hand with both of his. She's not going to take the ranch, he said. She's not going to take the ranch, Harper said. Ever. Not this way, and she knows it. James held her hand very tight for a moment. Then, in the voice of a boy who had been brave about something for longer than was fair to ask of him, Can we go home now? Yes, Harper said. We can go home. Evelyn Cross left Coldwater Creek 3 weeks later. She did not leave quietly. There was a civil suit still pending, and her departure did not resolve it, but she left permanently, which was the part that mattered. Her property to the east went to her brother, who came out from the city, looked at the situation, and within a month had introduced himself to Grayson at the feed store, and shaken his hand, and said that whatever his sister had been doing, he wanted no part of it. Grayson came home that evening and told Harper about the handshake at the dinner table, and James said, "Good," with the fierce satisfaction of an 8-year-old who had been waiting to say it, and Clara said nothing but reached over and took the last biscuit in a way that communicated her feelings precisely. Hank Doyle pleaded to a reduced charge in exchange for full testimony about his arrangement with Cross. He was gone from the county by winter. Harper did not waste grief on him, but she did not celebrate his misery either. He had made his choices, and now he was living in them, and that was a sufficient accounting. The financial recovery was slower than the legal victory, which was always the way of these things. The $1,800, eventually confirmed at just over $2,000 with Doyle's testimony, could not be simply retrieved from the air. But with the water rights resolved and the ranch's operational stability restored, Grayson was able to bring in a full cattle drive. That fall, negotiate a supply contract with a regional buyer that Briggs helped him structure fairly, and by spring, the books that Harper kept showed a ranch that was not merely surviving, but building forward. She kept the books because she had never stopped being the household manager. No one had asked her to stop, and she had not offered to. She had simply continued cooking, managing, organizing, solving the problems that arrived daily in the life of a working ranch. And somewhere in the continuation, it had stopped being a job in the way it had started as a job and become something else, something harder to categorize. Something she didn't try to categorize because she had learned that naming a thing too early could change it. It was Grayson who said it first. They were on the porch in the late evening, which had become their habit over the weeks. The children inside, doing whatever children did in the hour before bed, the ranch settled and quiet around them. The two of them sitting in the kind of comfortable silence that takes a long time to build and means more than most conversations. He was looking out at the pasture. She had her notebook in her lap, though she had stopped writing in it. "I've been trying to think of the right way to say something," he said. Harper looked at him. "I've been trying for about 3 weeks," he said, "which is longer than it usually takes me to say anything, so I figure that means I should probably just say it." "That's generally how it works," Harper said. He turned and looked at her. The evening was going blue and warm around them, and his face was entirely honest in the way it had become when he stopped managing what she saw there. "I don't want you to leave," he said. "And I don't mean as the household manager. I mean I want you to stay. Here. As part of this. As part of us." He paused. "I'm not saying this well." "You're saying it fine," Harper said. "Are you going to make me keep going?" "A little bit," she said. Something crossed his face that was unmistakably a smile, warm and real and slightly helpless. "Harper Lane," he said, "I have watched you take apart a conspiracy, outmaneuver a lawyer, organize a cattle recovery, depose a witness, and make apple pie from scratch, all inside of 2 weeks. I have watched you sit at my kitchen table in the middle of the night and do the work that saved everything I have in the world. I have watched my daughter, who has not voluntarily touched another adult since her mother died, put her arms around you outside a courthouse." He stopped. "I am asking you to stay. Because this ranch is yours as much as it's mine, whether or not the deed says so, and because I would like very much for you to let me spend a long time proving that I know what you're worth." The porch was quiet. In the house, James laughed at something, and Clara said something sharp back, and there was the sound of feet on the stairs, and then Mrs. Pruitt's voice settling them down. Harper looked at Grayson Holt, at this stubborn, honest, fundamentally decent man who had hired her on a letter and given her his ledgers, and stood aside when she needed to move, and stood close when it mattered. And she felt something in her chest loosen that she had not known was held tight. "I'm not easy," she said. "I know that," he said. "I'll always tell you what I think, even when you don't want to hear it. I've noticed. And I keep my own accounts," she said. "That doesn't change." "I'd be a fool to ask it to," he said. Harper looked at him for one more moment. Then she set her notebook aside and she said, "All right." "All right, you'll stay," he said. "All right, I'll stay," she said. He let out a breath. It was the specific exhale of a man who has been holding something for longer than he realized, and the relief in it was so genuine and unguarded that Harper felt the warmth of it move through her like the first real heat of spring, the kind that doesn't pretend to be anything other than what it is. He reached over and took her hand. Not tentatively. With the same quiet certainty he brought to everything that mattered to him. She let him. Inside, James called out, "Papa, Clara says I have to go to bed, but it isn't fair." And Grayson called back, "She's right." And James said, "You didn't even hear what I said." And Clara said, "He doesn't need to." And Harper laughed a real laugh, the uncalculated kind. And Grayson looked at her laughing, and his whole face went soft with something that needed no name because it was already understood between them. The ranch was quiet around them. The cattle were in the pasture, the fence was sound, the books were balanced, and the deed on the Northwater access had been properly filed and was no longer in dispute. The sky went dark and full of stars the way it did out here, where there was nothing between you and the distance. Harper Lane had arrived in Coldwater Creek with a worn trunk and a name on a folded letter, and they had laughed at her from the boardwalk before she had even picked up her bags. She was still here, they were not, and this ranch, this land, these children, this man beside her with her hand in his, was not something she had been given. It was something she had earned piece by piece, in the way that everything worth having is always earned through clear eyes, steady hands, and the absolute refusal to let anyone else determine what she was worth. Harper Lane had come to Holt Ranch to do a job. She had stayed because it was home,